Welcome to Reach Church. I'm Marshall Fant, the Director of Church Consulting and Strategic Planning for Gospel Fellowship Association Missions. My purpose is to encourage pastors and church leaders as you refocus, renew, and revitalize your churches. We've established this podcast to offer practical tips and suggestions as you equip disciples to make disciples. Marshall Fant, welcome back to GFA Missions Podcast, Reach Church. Appreciate so much GFA sponsoring this podcast. I trust it is a blessing to you and has been a blessing to you. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on different platforms, we thank you for tuning in and thank you for supporting GFA. And again, I want to thank the entire team here for putting this on. And we have a topic here today. I'll be honest with you, I really don't understand, but I have learned some things about it. And I want us to make sure we talk about it. And so when we think of the word AI, I mean, it's all over the place. It's all over the place in business and in anything you read about of what is it, and that's what I had to go to. So to be honest with you, we have a geek in our family, so I just kind of went to him and said, okay, and he had actually taught Sunday school on it at our church, so I asked him to pull those notes and let's talk through it. So our oldest son, Marshall, welcome to Podcast Reach Church.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, you've been on many times before, so again, glad to have you back. And what I wanted to do for the sake of our audience, I just kind of wanted to, again, I got his notes from the way he taught this in our church, but here's what I want to do. We're going to a working definition, right, Marshall? We're going to define it.
Right.
And then we're going to say, okay, so what, there's some issues of how we definitely can use this in ministry. And then there's some things we need to talk about of integrity and really the whole world of, okay, what can we do to keep a clear conscience in making sure it's our work. But then again, we all use artificial intelligence in some way, whether we use Siri or Alexa or whoever. So it's already a part of our world. And I think it's only becoming more so. So again, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. So Marshall, as we get into technology, all right, so just give us, because what I want to do is kind of like a funnel, okay, Marshall? I want to work on technology, and then from technology down, okay, so what is AI as a part of technology? And then really how does all that filter out to affect our lives, both individually, but more important, how it affects our ministry as a pastor and as a church? So give us some working definitions and categories of just the basic technology.
Yeah, I think AI fits within technology, and pastors and Christians ought to always consider how they use technology. We ought not to just embrace whatever technology without thinking about it, because whether or not we want to, the technology impacts us as we impact technology. There are a lot of great books out there on this. Dyer wrote a book called From the Garden to the City, and he tries to put a middle ground between what some people call instrumentalism, which just means that technology is just an instrument. It's something that anybody can use. And then there's determinism, which means that basically technology is unstoppable. Those are two extremes. And we kind of, as Christians, fall in the middle where we think people should be free to choose how they use tools, but tools themselves are oriented towards certain kinds of ends. So any kind of tool we use will impact us. And technology is just as kind of a tool. And as we use it for certain purposes, and it ends up also making impact on us. So we typically use technology to exert power or to express our will. And it's been defined. There's a book by Nicholas Carr called The Shallows, it's a little bit old now. It's from 2011, but it talks about what the internet is doing to our brains. Very good book. And he talks about the fact that basically mankind uses technology to exert his will over nature, over time and distance, and over one another. Those are the three categories that he uses. And so as we talk about the categories of technology, we often use technology to extend our physical strength, to extend our sensitivity or our range. So if you think of physical strength, you might think of a plow, you might think of a needle, or even on the extreme end, like a jet. Sensitivity would be like a microscope, or an amplifier would do that. We often use technology to reshape nature. So a reservoir, modification of food, things like that. or to help our mental powers. So pen and paper help us remember things by writing them down, stuff like that. Computers for processing information, and AI fits in that same category. So technology is a tool that people use to for a lot of different reasons, but really to exert our will over your circumstances. And AI is another one of those tools that can be used in that context.
All right, so let's back up a minute. One thing I wanted to make sure our listeners understand. So you told me in this beginning, so you're coming to this as a user, not a developer, right? So
I am not a developer.
Right.
Yeah, I want to be very clear that I'm a pastor. I like computers. I like technology. I don't code or program these things. I play around with them. And and in fact, a lot of people are users of AI, whether or not they even realize it. I think a lot of us use technology and don't fully comprehend all the nuts and bolts behind it. And that's okay. You don't have to understand every little detail in order to use it.
Right.
But so I don't come to this, and I fully understand that there might be some technology people who, when I describe something, might pull their hair out.
Yeah.
They might say, "Oh no, that's not exactly precise." But understand that I'm coming at it from a layman's perspective, and I don't completely may not have all my my T's crossed and my I's dotted on these things.
Got it. But I think you brought up an interesting point. So technology is not something new. And in fact, what was the first book you mentioned, From the Garden to the City?
The book is called From the Garden to the City by Dyer. Yeah. And it's really good. It talks about the fact that technology is something we all use, and you should
and have used for a long time. You mentioned pen and paper. You mentioned a plow. You mentioned other things like that, right?
Sure. And it hasn't always been like we just take this for granted. We take writing for granted, but the ancient Greeks fought over whether writing ought to be even encouraged, because they believed that memory was the key. And so if you committed too many things to paper, you would stop remembering. And so there was actually even debate over that. So we of course have gone a long way from that. Nobody really debates that today, but we do debate how to use things like artificial intelligence.
All right. So as we get in, so you gave those categories of technology. Okay. You want to comment, or you want to take that any further on the way?
Yeah, there's another really interesting thing from the Garden to the City. He talks about this man named McLuhan, and he has this way that people use technology from the beginning to the end. So when we adopt a technology to when it becomes mainstream. And he identifies it this way. He says, basically what we initially get a technology to do is to solve something we do naturally. So illustration would be the calculator. The calculator is something that solves arithmetic. It's something that we need to do, and it's a simple tool.
Yeah. Okay.
But what it does is once you adopt it, it eliminates or it amputates something that we used to do. So once you have the calculator, you really no longer are doing math in your head. And then what it also does is this is a little more complicated, but he talks about it retrieving something from the past. That is that it buys us time. We no longer have to sit around doing lots of calculations. We now can buy time by using a simple calculator. But the problem is that has a negative implication if we overuse it. So a calculator overused, today we see this is that we can't do math anymore. Another great example of this is the GPS. Now people have a very hard time even going down the street to somewhere very simple. They always put it in their phone if they're used to that, because they've gained something, but they've also lost something. So I think I want to mention that whenever you adopt in technology, you are basically engaging in a trade-off. You're allowing some benefits, but you have to acknowledge also there are some setbacks. And there are very few technologies, I would say, that would be all positive. When you adopt them, there's always some kind of trade-off.
And so this is important as now. So, all right. So as we go down it further in the funnel, okay, and we get into the I think you even mentioned there's a pattern to technology, right?
Right.
Where you want to explain that?
Right. So if we talk about the calculator, let's talk about the phone. So the phone starts off with the main goal of communication. We get a phone to communicate, and then we move on. It eliminates, it amputates. We move to that second line, the second stage, where now it's like, I don't have a landline, but I no longer have any time alone. There's no solitude, always having a phone with me. And then we go further down the line, that same tetrad there from McLuhan, and it's that we get to the negative where it can isolate you from other people, where you can only maintain surface friendships. So it started off as a goal of trying to maintain friendships, but in the end, it can actually have this negative effect if you're not careful. So every technology kind of follows a similar danger, a similar pattern that's possible.
Okay. So with that background and that being laid, let's jump into AI. Okay. Is that fair?
All right.
You ready to
Yeah,
do
that
that?
sounds great. So
All right.
AI is very semantically overloaded term. It can mean a lot of things. I want to really thank, there's a young man in our church who worked with me on this, and he contributed a lot on this Sunday school lesson. We taught together on ethics in AI was the goal behind teaching the class. We weren't trying to solve AI. We weren't trying to teach how to program AI, but basically how to use AI as a Christian ethically. And I appreciate Micah Brighton and his hard work pulling a lot of these notes together with me. But we pulled together basically the definitions from AI you can get. IBM.com has a lot of these definitions. That was a great resource. They say artificial intelligence is technology that enables computers and machines to simulate human intelligence and problem-solving capabilities. And that's really it, is that it's like an interface to a computer. Is one way of looking at it, that it simulates a human's way of looking at data instead of a strict or a strict computer way, an older way style of looking at data. There's also several different things, terms that are important to kind of keep separate. That is machine learning. It's a branch of AI that focuses on using, quote, data and algorithms to enable AI to imitate the way humans learn. So machine learning imitates the way people learn, but it isn't exactly the same. We use a lot of anthropomorphic terms. That means we're saying things. We say a computer's thinking, but it's not really thinking. It's processing data. We say a computer, is learning. It isn't really learning. It's simulating learning, and we call deep learning, and it's a subset of machine learning. So you have deep learning, and then under that machine learning, and then under that is deep learning, where you have what's called neural networks to simulate complex decision-making power. Again, it gets very complicated, but and it's interesting as you read the literature on this. Sometimes some of the computer programmers aren't exactly sure why it works the way it does, only that it works. So there are some kind of mysterious things about AI that even a lot of the computer scientists that I've read say, we're not 100% certain why it begins to arrive at certain conclusions, which can create problems because you don't always know why an AI has generated a certain response.
Okay. So it can't just replace everything. There's still got to be a check behind it.
And really AI is fed data, and then that data, it analyzes that data and can summarize that data or can create new data, but it's based on information that it's been fed. So these large language models, LLMs like ChatGPT, which you heard a lot about in the news, there are a bunch of them now, but they are basically fed the entire internet. And so they have all this information of human contributions that they then use to generate new content, essentially to synthesize and spit out content. So that's the basic idea behind AI. Again, I'm not an expert, but that's the best I can do in a short amount of time.
All right. So as we, as we work through these things and the different, you got technology, then you got AI as a part of technology, and then you got these other divisions of AI, or however you want to explain it. All right. So now let's just walk through a couple of things here. AI is not a living thing.
Right.
You put that in your notes, right?
Yeah, you'll sometimes get people who are more in the secular world. You'll have these computer maximalists who believe that, the AI is going to save the world, and they even think about AI as a conscious being, and they use this kind of conversations with ChatGPT that people might have, and they'll say that that there's no difference between a human being and AI. And this is just not true. There are so many differences between these two. And there are some great articles that have been written out there that deal with this issue. But the main thing I would say, if you ever get in a conversation with someone who brings this up as a problem for Christianity, as in, God created living beings, and now we're creating living beings in these computer AIs, I think it's great to, one of the most helpful distinctions. I actually heard in a lecture by Dr. Kristen Davis. She was giving a lecture in Charlotte on introductions to AI and faith back in 2023. And she made the distinction from Aristotle's definition of living things, that life has the ability for two things: self-nutrition and reproduction. And computers obviously have neither. The second thing that's kind of interesting to me is that computers are made up of hardware and software, and their hardware is important, that the component parts are irrespective of the whole. In other words, I can take a computer apart, I can set the
Right.
parts on a shelf, and I can take them off later, maybe a year later, put them back together, and it still works. And you can't do that with a human being or with any living thing. You can't separate my body into different parts, put it on a shelf, and then come back and put it back together, because the human body is not separate parts that are irrespective of the whole. The human body is a whole unit. It is a being that was made by God. So therefore, you cannot reincorporate the separated parts. So that's a really interesting and helpful distinction. And that the other thing that's helpful in distinguishing living beings from AI is that software cannot desire or choose to act. If a machine fails to act, that's a bug. But a human being, or even any living animal, even your dog, can look at something, like look at a meal and choose not to eat, or choose not to act. A computer cannot do that. A computer must act when it's told to act. And so that's, again, just a couple of little things that help as you talk about the distinctions between living beings and these AI models.
All right, so let's shift from the backdrop of the definitions and all this to actually applications in ministry.
Sure.
So again, our audience are pastors, Sunday school teachers, Bible study leaders, average churchgoers who want to, we've incorporated technology in a lot of things we do already. Right. But let's talk about some applications. I think you got a couple of examples there of using AI in ministry.
I don't use AI a lot, but I have used it in several. The first time I used AI, I was actually preaching and through a section where Paul circumcises Timothy, and I was just curious whether that was a right decision or a wrong decision. I came to my conclusion based on some of my reading, and then I decided to check with ChatGPT and see what it said. And it actually had a really great answer. It summarized the different viewpoints, and I thought that was very helpful. The best, I'll put it this way, to me, I think the most helpful way to use AI in ministry is as a research assistant. It is not helpful in generating new content, but it is helpful in basically asking questions of content that you already have. Just today, I went through I use a Bible software called Accordance. Years ago, I purchased journal articles, all sorts of things. And I went through and I searched on my journal articles for articles about Philippians, which I'm going to be preaching on soon. And I printed them all out in PDFs on my computer, and then imported them into a cool AI called Google Notebook LM, which stands for Notebook Language Model, I believe. But the Notebook LM is great for this. So you can limit your sources on Notebook LM. And it's free. It's run by Google, and you upload your sources. So I took all these resources that I owned, uploaded them into Google Notebook LM, and I can then ask questions of my resources that I have put into there. So I asked, what are some of the major themes of the book of Philippians? That was really helpful. Most of these you already would know, but there was one interesting question that one question I asked that generated an interesting response, which was, what is some background information someone should know? I think I said, what is some cultural background information someone should know before they read the book of Philippians? And I had about 20 sources. In fact, these are the papers. So these are my printouts of the PDFs that I had. And I could read this and sort and try to find that information. But just by uploading them and then by asking that question, I got a really great summary with sources of all the basic background information, including some differences between Roman and Greek culture, some things about the colony, Philippi being a colony, the background of Paul's establishing the church in Philippi, some of the background of citizenship and Roman culture. And Paul talks about citizenship in Philippians. So these are all things that are pulled from the sources that I gave it. And that's all done using a language.
Can we stop right there a minute?
Sure, yeah.
All right. Sorry. So I think it's key that you said you pull those from the resources you gave it. So these are commentaries or articles that you know are line up with where you are theology.
They're reputable sources.
There you go. And they would be conservative, believing in answers scripture. So this is just not searching the web, is what I'm trying to say.
You can get in. Correct. So AIs, I have to
Yeah.
say, there's a danger of something called hallucinating, where an AI will make up a source or make up something that's not true if you just don't if you don't limit it to certain
Yeah.
sources.
Okay.
And so that's why this is very helpful. Is if you say using only these sources, please tell me what is
Right.
this answer,
Okay.
and it will generally find it.
So you put a filter out there. You're working through a grid
Correct.
of articles that you'd already purchased. You'd already, that should be in where you are in the
Right.
theological world. And then so AI then with the filter you've already put on there, right? Because of those
Right.
articles, then it produced the answers you wanted to ask from those articles, right? Is that
Right.
That's what I'm hearing you say?
Right. And the way AI works here is almost like another interface. So, you know how before the mouse came along, you had to use just a keyboard to interface with the computer.
Yeah.
Before that was punch cards, right? Or something to that. You would use
Yes.
different kinds of interfaces with the computer, and each one makes it a little bit more useful. And now we can talk to our phones. We talk to our phones and tell them to call somebody or to send a text, or that's using AI. It's part of that is using that interface. So it's natural language. As I'm typing, it's understanding what I'm saying. I use understanding in quotes, and it's able to retrieve that information. So this is a very useful thing for pastors to have. And it produced a lot of really great help for me in a very short amount of time. So I think that's very, very helpful. That's a very positive side. And that's probably the best part that I've discovered of AI is this kind of the ability to summarize and give you a lot of data boiled down to its essence. Here's the essence of this particular this question, especially if you're dealing with a very complex topic. You can get a PhD thesis and put it in there and ask for a summary. And rather than waiting through 150 pages, you can get a 2-paragraph summary of an argument. So those things that pastors will really benefit from, I believe.
All right. So let me go off just a little bit on that. So you mentioned this Google app. What was the name of it again?
It's called Notebook LM, and it's produced by Google, and it's free, so you can access it. There might be a paid version. I'm really not sure, but
and you mentioned Chat GPT, right?
You can pay all these AI models like Chat GPT, Gemini. There are many others like Claude.
All right. Now, who does the Gemini? Is that Google as well?
Google also does Gemini, right?
Okay.
And Chat GPT is OpenAI, does that. And a lot of these, there's Copilot, which is run by Microsoft.
Yep.
A lot of people have their own version of this basic model, and you can pay upwards of $20 a month if you want to get a lot more access. But I have never had to pay for that. I generally use a free model because I don't use it enough to really need to have that kind of access.
All right. So let me, again, just as we go through this. So, I mean, even, you showed me, I think I used Microsoft Copilot.
Right.
And I just wanted a PowerPoint slide of a balance scale.
Right.
And you showed me how to do that, and it generated it, right? So, I mean,
that's generative, right? There's a generative AI, which is slightly different than what I'm talking about here. Well, it's actually similar, but the generative AI, we said, this is a great use of that. You say, I need a specific picture, of a balance scale with this happening. Well, you can draw a description. You can ask for it. You can say, I'd like generate an image, and you just fill a description with as many descriptors as you can, and you'd be surprised. It normally can come back with something somewhat helpful. Not always useful, not always usable, but at least something to get you started.
All right, so let's go down a couple more roads. So we got all these tools, right? This is just more tools in the tool bag to make our computer more useful for what we want to do. What verses? So as we try to take our thoughts here, you had a whole list of verses to kind of put a box around or kind of make us think through some things with this. So what I'd like to do in our remaining minutes, I'd like to just go through some of these verses to kind of capture our thinking. And then I'd like for you just to comment on, again, in the context of what we do, pastors mainly, Sunday school teachers, Bible study leaders. Let's talk about maybe a couple more advantages, but also let's deal with the integrity things. Okay. Right. So if we, in our remaining minutes, if we can do that, just kind of, we've got all the background, got specifics now. So what would be some guiding verses that we must ponder on as we think through AI?
Well, I think that like I mentioned, if you're talking to someone who believes that there's no distinction between human and machine, we always talk about people being made in the image of God and the uniqueness of
Hmm.
mankind, that mankind is different and that's special and something that ought not to be just taken for granted. I think that's something that younger people might struggle with more coming up in a culture where they talk to their computers, they talk to their phones. You need to assert that there's uniqueness to mankind that God has made. So Genesis 1:26 and 27,
Hmm.
being made in the image of God. But I think
Right.
doing everything uh, with honoring the Lord as your goal really should be what we do. Not just accepting the culture because it's what everybody does. 1 Corinthians 10:31. Whether you eat, drink, whatever you do, and whatever you do includes using your computer. Do all to the glory of God. So we
Amen.
ought to be careful to do everything to God's glory and not to just go along with our culture, however it goes. I also have some thoughts about um, uh, the idea of ethics, and we need to be careful not to pass off work that's not ours as our own. This is a really big problem in academics, and I think it could be a big problem among pastors as well, or teachers, Sunday school teachers, where we get under the crunch at Saturday night, and we need a Sunday school lesson for the next day. So we say generate a 3 point outline from the book of or from Psalm 23 or something, and it generates it for us, and we bring that into the pulpit or into the teaching lectern, and we present that as if it's ours. And I
Yeah.
think that that's a very dangerous thing. I think there's probably, if you Googled, I bet you could find lots of pastors who've been exposed for using AI, or teachers who've been exposed for using AI. So that is something to consider. The other thing I think that's very important for us to think about, and this is kind of a brain teaser, maybe to think about it this way, is do we actually owe our the AI we use? Should we be polite with it? Do we owe courtesy
Yeah.
to your phone or to your little Echo Dot that you have in your kitchen, your timer? Should you say thank you, or
Yeah.
or is this something that can you be rude to it? And actually, I wrestled with this for a little bit. It still sounds like a silly question, but here's where I came down, and feel free to disagree, but I think just like when we make things, if we make a painting in our image, if you paint a picture of a person, especially if it's a specific person, and then you were to be rude to that picture, if you were to tear it up or spit on it or throw darts
Yeah.
at it or whatever, you're showing what you think about that person, and that's rude to that person. And that's why we say we ought to be kind to all people, because we're made in the image of God, and to show and
Right.
how you treat other people demonstrates what you think about God. Well, I in a funny way, when you have these, use the word again, anthropomorphic voices, these voices that are computer generated, but are made to sound like people.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
if we are rude to them, if we say rude things or tell them to shut up or whatever, if we're rude to these AIs, I do think that it borderlines on being disrespectful to something we've made in our image,
Mm.
which again is when we're made in the image of God. So by kind of a little bit of a tortured logic, I'm saying that we ought to be respectful, even if it is a computer generated voice, just out of respect for the image of God. And you
Yeah.
might say, well, the computer's not made in the image of God, but it's made in the image of man. And we're making things in our own image. And I think and by that stretch, I would say that we ought to be careful to be not, you don't need to be overly polite, but I don't think you ought to be rude to your
Right.
AI. I think that would actually could be borderline sinful, in my personal opinion.
Yeah. That is something we must wrestle with, and that is, I've thought about it. I mean, do you tell Alexa thank you, or do you not, or do you vent out with Alexa when you don't want to hear, she gives you something you don't want to hear? I don't know, but
Right. Right.
that's something good to think about. All right, so when you think, all right, so sermons, it would be or Sunday school lessons, it would be very tempting to use AI. Like, say you've had a hard week,
Right.
busy week, you're behind, but that's really no different than borrowing somebody else's sermon off the internet.
Correct. Yeah.
And was that a fair way to equate it?
I absolutely, because the way these models are made is that they actually are just collecting and synthesizing all the knowledge that they can find online. So they're
Okay.
borrowing from other places and then producing this material. So it's wrong for you to consider that your work. The prompt you give it is not the same as typing and doing your own work. I think there's a huge difference between, say, writing with a pen and typing with a keyboard. So you might be able to type faster than you can write, but you're still producing the work yourself.
Sure. Yeah.
Than it is to go to a prompt and say, you know, give me a 5-point outline on the book of Daniel or whatever. And that's a very different kind of a thing. I'd also say that you need to be careful. It's less ethically dubious is the idea of you can actually highlight certain text now with certain apps. I think Apple just came out with this with their Apple Intelligence stuff on on the computer. You can highlight and you can say, make more professional or make more casual. You can actually, and it will look at your text. Usually it's an email, and it can rewrite the email or the text, whatever it is, in a more professional manner. Or in a more, I think that's way down the line of ethical problems, because again, that's something that's like having an editor. What I'm more concerned about is someone is coming from is actually just is borrowing someone else's words and taking those ideas and claiming them as your own. That's very dangerous, because you really don't, you haven't thought through those ideas. You've not allowed the Spirit to work. You haven't prayed over those ideas. You haven't yourself dug those ideas out. You're just letting it's almost like preaching someone else's message and trying to pass it off as your own. Yeah.
Yeah. And if we as pastors cut short that, then we are not being changed in the image of Christ. And then how can we help others, right? So, I mean, there's a huge, I just have a huge integrity problem with people claiming anybody else's sermon as their own without giving credit, much less than this AI generated everything for you.
There is something we talked about at the very beginning about the steps where you adopt something to solve a certain problem, and then you end up having negative implications at the end. And this is where that negative implication comes, because the reason you might adopt something is to learn. You might do AI to learn something. Like I'm saying, I might use it to query a series of documents. But if you don't exercise your mental muscles, you will end up getting lazy in that department, and you will have a trade-off. So I think that we need to be very careful in how we use these things, because it's not always clear where this is going and what the trade-offs are going to be, other than us getting lazy. That's the potential really bad, trade-off at the end.
All right. What about other warnings, other things that may fall into this in the area of ministry? Okay, so we talked about sermons and Bible prep or sermon prep, teaching prep. Are there any other areas that come to your mind? I mean, not that you have to have any, but
I think those are the main ones. Having AI tools is usually, I would say, generally a good thing. They're going to save you time. If you have someone who's designing graphics and they can type in a prompt and it gives them graphics, or if you're doing the website and you typed in a prompt and it gives you more, those are generally good things. And so part of my goal also today in talking about this was to say, it's okay to use this stuff. There are some folks, and I've had conversations with them who really bristle at the idea of artificial intelligence as a category. And I understand that this is not the same as human intelligence, but you ought not. This is just another tool that you can use that, like any tool, has its trade-offs. Its good parts and also its negative parts. So if you use it well, and if you use it carefully, understanding what you're doing, then it shouldn't be a problem. I think I would encourage you to use it where you can. You can come up with some pretty funny things. I actually was involved with some Vacation Bible School stuff this past year and needed to come up with some jokes related to a very specific theme. And it's very difficult to come up with jokes about a certain theme day after day. And so I queried Chat GPT for some ideas related to this thing, and it came up with 5 or 6. Now, there were probably 1 or 2 that were good, but that's the kind of stuff you should not not hesitate or out of your conscience. I mean, if your conscience lets you, I'm not going to tell you what to do there, but if someone else is telling you, be careful, don't do this, it's dangerous. It can be, but I think just like any other tool, but I think it also has great value and great benefit for most uses.
Sure. All right. So to wrap it up, any other thoughts, any other insights, any other comments you want to give to our listeners?
Well, I think that I say don't buy all the hype. So remember that the
Yeah.
people who are generating this, where they come from and their unbiblical view of man, they often are what called transhumanists. They believe that we're going to have be able to do brain transplants and have all ongoing, basically replicate the human mind in machines, and they have all these lofty ideas that are disconnected from truth. And so,
Mm.
don't get sucked into that, or don't allow that to scare you either. I mean, they
Right.
pray for them. They don't know the truth, many of them, and so understand that AI is coming from that part of the
Mm.
country,
Sure.
generally speaking. So there are going to be certain. Often you'll find, and this makes the news often. You'll find a slant, right? You'll find
Hmm.
a bias built into AI,
Right.
and you just be aware that it's there. Don't get offended at every little thing that get up that isn't exactly what you'd expect, but definitely, be excited. This is an interesting time to live in. There's a lot of interesting
Yeah.
things going
Yeah.
on, and it's
Sure.
fun. And so I'd encourage you to play around with it and see what you come up with, see what happens, see how you can use it, and it just might save you time. It just might end up
Good.
being something that actually helps and enhances your ministry.
All right. So, ask this, and this is just off the cuff here. So, have you ever seen a podcast on or a YouTube on just how to use AI as a pastor?
I don't think
I haven't
I have.
searched it. Yeah.
I've seen like AI for creative professionals.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I've searched for AI for writers, that's a big
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
AI for like graphic design people.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
but yeah, so
Okay.
I'm
Well, that's
sorry, I
good.
don't have any
I
good
mean, I
good.
think I saw Logos was putting out some kind of AI
Right.
something.
We should have
So
mentioned that. I don't use Logos
yeah.
personally, but I that is
Yeah.
something we should have said probably from the beginning. Is that their new subscription is a big AI push where they do research through that, and that is something that if you have access to that, if you pay for that, you get AI powered search. And yeah,
Mm.
I personally don't use Logos, but the people who do use it say it's great, and they really
Yeah.
like it.
Good, good. Okay, any final thoughts? Marshall Fant, pastor at Harvest Baptist Church in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and our resident geek
Just
that we depend upon. So,
there, like I said, Doctor, her name was Kristen Davis. I really
right.
appreciated her. You might be able to find some of her work online. She's a
And
PhD.
she came from a believing viewpoint, right? She's a believer.
Right. She's with, I think,
Yeah.
Southern Evangelical Seminary was
Yeah.
they were
Right.
putting on they put on a series of philosophy and apologetics conference last year that this was part of, and I got the two she did, which was excellent. So excellent. I really appreciate her work. Nicholas Carr and his book of The Shallows on the Internet is very good, and then Dyer's book on From the Garden to the City. Those are just great books on technology. I'd also like to recommend just broader cultural book called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. Very excellent book. A lot of these books have come out because people feel like they're getting sucked into AI and can't ever get away
Mm.
from it. So I think
Right.
it's important also. I'll end with this, that I actually have I don't I've waited longer and longer in the week to go to my computer for actually writing my messages. I spend a lot of time with pen and paper, a lot of time with my Bible, and note cards and legal pads and things like that right now, because I found that the computer for me is extremely distracting.
Mm.
If I'm writing, if I'm trying to I hate to say it that way, but actually produce something
Yeah.
from nothing, almost,
Right.
produce a sermon. It's very difficult to not just be overwhelmed by all the emails and things on my computer. So I would just encourage you not to feel like you have to do it this way. You can do it the old way. And God
Mm.
has used men praying over their Bibles and with the pen and ink for many, many years, and he will continue to
Amen.
do so. So I don't think you
Amen.
have to use it. This is just another tool that you can use occasionally. And
Yeah.
like I said, I have become more and more, I wait longer and longer to actually code to the computer so that by the time I'm actually typing, I basically know what I'm going to be preaching on. I'm just putting
Yeah.
it on in the
Amen.
computer. I think that's, to me, has been extremely helpful so that I don't get distracted by
Yep.
all
Well
these
said.
toys. They're a lot
Yeah.
of fun to
Well
play with.
said. Yeah. Well said. Good way to sum it up. Okay, so again, if you need to any follow-up, you can email me, mfant@gfamissions.org. I'll be happy to put you in touch with Marshall or Harvest Baptist Church, Rock Hill, South Carolina. Again, thanks for your time today. Thanks for being an avid user of technology, not a developer, but a user who can help explain it to us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for the privilege. It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
So here at GFA Missions, we thank you for watching, listening. Anything we can do to help your church to make disciples in a better way, we're here to help. Marshall, thanks for your time. We'll talk to you later.
You're listening to ReChurch, a podcast of Gospel Fellowship Association Missions. If you would like more information about our ministry or how we may assist you and your church, visit us at gfamissions.org/consulting.